Okay, I think we might kick this off, Declan. If you are ready to go, do you want to go ahead with the slides, please? So, good morning. My name is Kirsten Savage-Lyons. I look after the marketing in Ireland for Echo. And with me here today is our expert speaker, Declan Timmins. I am just going to go through a bit of housekeeping. So these slides and the recording will be shared with everybody after, hopefully later today, if not early tomorrow morning. So anyone who's joined late or didn't get to go or wants to share this on with all of their friends, we will share this on. We do encourage as many questions as possible. So there's a Q&A feature on this. Please pop it, any question you have throughout into that. And we'll either get to it at the end. If it makes sense to get to it throughout, we'll do that. And we have one or two polls to share with you. So next slide there, Declan, please. Okay, so the agenda today. So why we're all here, NIS 2. So we're just going to run through the differences between NIS and NIS 2. Then Declan will go through the articles of interest, talk you through a roadmap to compliance, find out if your sector or organisation is in scope. He'll go through the penalties, incident reporting, and the training involved. Then we'll go through the compliance gap analysis and the ECHO approach. We'll round that up with some key takeaways and, like I said, the Q&A. So before I hand you over to Declan, I am just going to give you a quick poll. And that question is, have you started on your NIS 2 compliance journey yet? So Declan, I think if we just give people maybe 20, 30 seconds to answer that, and maybe you can give us your thoughts. So you can see those results coming in live, I think, can you?
I actually can't, sorry.
Oh,
maybe you can share them.
So we are at 71% no, 29% yes. What do you reckon? Is that what you're kind of seeing?
Yeah, you know, it's early days. There are some proactive organisations out there who we're working with who are already started or on their NIS 2 compliance journey. Typically, they're the organisations that have a really low risk appetite and want to make sure they're compliant with everything that comes across. But equally, there are, you know, organisations who are starting that journey now, and you know that's keen. Like the timeline is pretty short, so you're talking about up to October this year to become compliant. So it's really time to start moving on it.
Yeah, I think you're at 76 no, so not surprising.
Yeah.
But okay, great. Well, look, I'll hand you all over to the capable hands of Declan, and I'll pop back in at the end for the Q&A.
Morning, everyone. Yeah, you know, NIS 2 is a hot topic. You know, and you can see by the attendance at the webinar, like how important it is, and the understanding NIS 2 is something that a lot of organisations need to get to grips with. Those who were operators of essential services previously or digital service providers will have a deep understanding with the NIS 1. So NIS 1 was the first directive from Europe. You know, it tried to protect national critical infrastructure, focused on those operators of essential service, like the big power generators, ESB, and the likes of those, and try to improve their cybersecurity maturity over time, which it was successful. And on review, then we come across with NIS 2. So NIS 2, along with a lot of the regulations coming from Europe, have kind of common themes across them all. If you look at DORA, NIS 2, the CER directives, they all have common themes around top management accountability for risk management. Business resilience is absolutely critical. Supply chain management is an absolutely critical one that's popping up. And prompt incident reporting to protect us all, essentially, to make sure that we share those incidents when they're ongoing pretty quickly with our peers. So the purpose of NIS 2, essentially, strengthen security requirements across Europe, addressing supply chain security, as I say, absolutely key. Streamlining reporting obligations to understand that everybody has the similar reporting obligations. Introduce more stringent supervisory measures, which is key. Implement stricter enforcement requirements and harmonizing sanctions across Europe. So some key dates then. NIS 2 entered into force on the 16th of January 2023. On the 18th of October, the government will commence enforcement of NIS 2 compliance. So that means in advance of that, they need to transpose the directive into national law. So they have until the 17th of October 2024 to do that, to get it transposed into national law. That's a fast timeline for the government. They do feel that they'll make that date and become compliant or have it transposed by the 17th. And then the 17th of April 2025 is the deadline for the government to submit a list of essential and important entities, and that's key to understand, what that list looks like. Some of the articles of interest, a lot of articles in here. A lot of the articles, the earlier articles, deal with the member states' requirements, the National Cybersecurity Centre requirements, the CSIRT requirements. So there's a lot of, peer reviews of their own workings, understanding each other, sharing information, and doing all the good stuff. From an organizational point of view, I suppose the key articles within the NIS2 are Article 20 on governance, Article 21, which dictates a top 10 mandated risk management measures, which are specific requirements or control requirements of NIS2. And Article 23, which detail the reporting obligations to understand, you need to make a quick report within 24 hours is one of the key ones. And then Article 32, just one to consider when you're considering your budget for NIS2 compliance, is independent audits by the national competent authorities will be conducted by a third party, and that third party cost will be borne by the organization, as in your organization. So something to consider. So then look at what the roadmap looks like. So the very first step on the roadmap is to check that you're in scope for NIS2 compliance. And that might not be a very straightforward and simple case, because it's a very broad directive. There's lots of organizations and types of organizations in there in Annex 1 and 2. So you might be listed there. If you generally feel broadly you will have a compliance requirement, I would suggest that you move and assume that you will have a NIS2 compliance requirement. There are, I suppose, some organizations that will struggle a little bit with understanding how they fall under NIS2 compliance or not. Raise awareness to requirements and penalties. Absolutely, awareness first thing within an organization to make sure that everybody is aware of what the regulation is, what the penalties involved if there are breaches of compliance. Risk management training for all senior management. There is an accountability piece for top management around risk management. So to be accountable, they need to understand the process of doing your risk management. So need to approve, understand, operationalize, and be fully bought into the whole risk management process within the organization. Budget for NIS2 compliance expenditure. Again, something, there will be a budget, depends on where you are in your cyber maturity journey as to how much that budget is. I would suggest that most organizations would have some of these controls in there. These are basic controls, essentially. These are things that if you feel you're in the mix for being an essential entity for a country, your organization really should have the majority of these controls in place already, from a standard cyber security perspective, if not for compliance. Compliance gap analysis against the NIS2 top 10 measures. Again, how you would deliver that, how you'd understand and how you quantify where the gaps are is important. And then when identify those gaps, to close out all those gaps efficiently and in some sort of structured way so that you become compliant by the deadline of 17th or 18th of October, 24. And then NIS2 is not going to go away. So if you have a compliance requirement in NIS2, that continues. So, while you've closed all the gaps at step 6, you need to constantly review and make sure that you remain compliant, because, could easily slip, and, you will be subject to audits. It will likely not be the self-assessment questionnaire type audits under NIS1, which was primarily driven by the National Cybersecurity Centre. It was likely to be more, that was, I suppose, considered a light touch, risk-based approach to assessment and forming baselines of the organizations that were there and working with them. It was successful. I won't say it wasn't successful at all. It was successful, but I suppose National Cyber probably struggled with trying to get the resources and capability to try go out and audit each of the individual OESs. And there were only about 100 OESs on NIS 1. So the expectation is that will be somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 organizations will fall under compliance for NIS 2. So the work of trying to audit for 2,000 to 4,000 organizations is considerable, and we'll talk about that later. So if you impacted, so the first place to go to determine if you're impacted is to the directive itself in Annex 1 and 2 to list what are considered in NIS 2 compliance essential entities or important entities. So determine if your entity size makes you regulate under NIS 2. So, it's for large and medium-sized organizations mostly. There are exceptions where no matter the size of the entity, you will have a compliance requirement. And also to check if you fall under other legislation specific to your sector. So things like DORA, the central bank, or the National Competent Authority for Financial Services, essentially. The DORA directive is a Digital Operational Resilience Act, which just falls into the financial sector. It is considered lex specialis in relation to NIS 2. So NIS 2 is a broad directive which covers all organizations, including the financial services. But because financial services fall under DORA, the DORA Act is considered a more specific act and a more specific law for that sector. So that means that the banking sector will continue to be regulated by the central bank, and they will consider to have compliance requirements under DORA, and may not have to or will not have to have compliance requirements under NIS 2 because they're covered off by DORA. So is your sector in scope for compliance? So just taken from the Annex A or Annex 1, sorry, of the directive, there are a number of sectors, including energy, transport, banking, financial market infrastructure, health, drinking water, digital infrastructure, cloud providers, data centers, DNSs, etc., ICT service management, B2B, managed service providers, and managed and MSSPs. So again, like Echo ourselves, we're going to fall under the directive as an essential entity because of our size. We're up to 1,000 staff at the moment. And we're an MSSP delivering to a lot of critical infrastructure clients and others in the country. So we're on that journey ourselves, and we're making progress, I suppose. Also, public administration, government departments. There is some consideration that local government may not be included in the first tranche of NIS 2, and that's a decision to be made by government, but has not been made yet. So I just for the moment, I take it that you will have a compliance requirement until you hear more. And then space. So you can see there are a lot of sectors covered there. It covers almost everything. There's very few sectors left out. And then for important entities, again, research, digital providers, manufacturing, postal and courier services, waste management, manufacturing, production and distribution of chemicals, food production, which is a strange one, and processing and distribution. So again, entities that probably never had compliance requirements around European compliance requirements around cyber are being pulled into the mix. There are some caveats in that. So in manufacturing, you're looking at medical devices and in vitro diagnostic medical devices, computer, electronic and optical products, electrical equipment, machinery and equipment, motor vehicles, trailers and semi-trailers, and other transport equipment. And then digital providers, online marketplaces, online search engines, social network service platforms, and in research. Research is primarily where the primary goal is to exploit the results for commercial purposes, generally speaking. So, it's not just all researchers that might be in there. But again, it's something that you need to investigate yourself and be sure that you fall in or out of compliance. In relation to the organization size or impact, NIS 2 primarily applies to medium and large organizations, and a medium organization is considered 50 to 249 employees or a revenue of more than 10 million. A large entity is greater than 250 employees or more than 50 million in revenue. Some entities, as listed under Article 2, are subject to NIS regardless of their size. So, there are some. I suppose essentially, if you're an organisation that provides a service across the state that is of utmost importance, and you're the only entity that provides that, well, then the state will consider you to be have an NIS2 compliance requirement. Or, you know, again, across Europe, and you know, there might be certain entities that will be called in as NIS2 compliance by the government. So the government can make calls on it. They have not made a call yet, but it's up to them to decide whether they want to pull you into compliance, even if you're not listed. Or an entity where the disruption of the entity may have a significant impact on public safety, security, or health. So again, another reason why you might be having NIS2 compliance requirements. So the first thing you got to do is to make sure that your senior management are aware of responsibilities under NIS2. So, you know, they need to be accountable. They need to understand, approve, and be accountable for all risk management process. So that means that they really need to understand how that methodology is, how you calculate your risk, how you manage your risk, how you address your risk, how you prioritize your risk. So they need to understand that fully. They need to understand your risk register, need to understand how approvals and how your risk appetite is set. So all that stuff they really need to come to grips with to make sure in every organization from a cyber point of view, cybersecurity risk and risk management is absolutely core. That's everything else is bells and whistles. Really, you need to have a working, operational, daily reviewed, or you know, daily updated risk register, because that's the place that you're going to manage all your risks. It dictates the resources you need. It dictates the budget you need to fix those risks. It also kind of highlights the areas of greatest risk for that organization. So absolutely key, and absolutely key from a NIS2 compliance requirement that top management take that on board. And that's one of the key areas of NIS2, that top management responsibility. Ensure that senior management are aware of the sanctions and fines, and we'll run through those fines in a moment. And ensure staff are aware of the organization's risk management methodology and NIS2 compliance requirements. So again, it's not just that senior management need to understand the whole risk management process. They need to devolve that understanding down to the staff, and to devolve that understanding of the NIS2 compliance requirements down to staff as well. So looking at enforcement and penalties, again, something like the GDPR, similar kind of enforcement penalties, ranging from fines, you know, and the fines for essential entities run to €10,000 or 2% of total worldwide turnover. So it's quite considerable. The fines for an important entity is 7,000 or 1.4% of global turnover. So again, you know, it really fines to focus the mind, I suppose, and make sure that people become compliant. But there are other penalties, and some of the other, I suppose, more interesting penalties. You can issue warnings, issue binding instructions, order to cease conduct that is non-compliant, order to bring risk management measures and reporting obligation to compliance in a specific manner and within a specific period, order to inform the natural or legal personnel who provide services and activities that are potentially affected by a significant cyber threat, order to implement a recommendation provided as a result of security audits within a reasonable time frame, designate a monitoring officer with a well-defined task and determined period of time to oversee compliance. So you know, to designate somebody to make sure that you become compliant, order to make public aspects of non-compliance, and that's a serious one there in Hage. You know, so you make public the fact that your organization are non-compliant with NIS2 and the details of how you are non-compliant. You know, so that's highlighting the individuals who, you know, failed in their compliance requirements to manage that legal requirement for their organization. Impose administrative fines, as we went through, 10,000 or 7,000 euros. And essential entities of certificate or authorization. So they can remove or suspend your certification or your for the services you provide. So if you've got a certified product that you deliver, they can remove that certification so that you can't provide the service or products. And the responsibility for discharging managerial responsibilities at chief executive officer or legal representative levels can be temporarily prohibited from exercising managerial functions. And that's applicable to essential entities, but not important entities. So in that, they can take away your management position, I suppose, temporarily if you fail to comply. So some serious sanctions there on an individual basis and also across an organization. And then incident reporting, again, absolutely key. You've seen like the HSE attack, we need to be able to report quickly. We need to get the information to the organizations that matter to make sure that we don't have a spread. So if an incident happens, we need to be able to tell everybody about it. We need to get the national certs involved. We need to get share that information across Europe if it's a larger cyber attack. So the NIS2 put in force 24-hour early warning. So if you suspect that you are under attack and there's a malicious act or there's an impact that will have cross-border implications for different states, we need to have an early warning from yourselves reported to your CSERT at the National Cybersecurity Centre. And then an official report within 72 hours, an incident notification to update the previous information and indicate the initial assessment and the significance of an incident, including the severity impact, and as well as, where available, any indicators of compromise. And the indicators of compromise are really important because, if you've got some piece of code that was included in that attack or some sort of that you need to be interpreted, the CSERT from the National Cyber are really, good in this area, and they're really helpful, and they work hard to distribute those indicators of compromise to organizations like yourselves. Then upon request, after that initial 72 hours, upon request from the CSERT, we want updates, intermediate reports, and see where we're going with this attack and managing the incident. And then within a month, typically, a final report with a detailed description of the incident, severity, impact, the type of threat, the root cause that likely triggered the incident, and mitigation measures applied and ongoing. So we do want lessons learned from that attack. You do want to be able to learn from that incident. And then if that hasn't closed out within a month, there will be progress reports required, obviously, until the incident has been closed out fully. So cyber risk management training. Ensure effective cyber risk management processes are defined and operational. So, again, top management getting on board with how cyber risk is managed across an organization. Provide cybersecurity risk management education and training to senior management on a regular basis. So it's not good enough that we just do it once. We need to prove and be accountable. So again, in the sense of like a GDPR analogy, it's all about accountability. So, when you're being audited, you have to show evidence that you're compliant with NIS2. So how do you show evidence? You have to have some sort of documentation or evidence to prove that you're in compliance. Ensure senior management understand the operational procedures for risk management. So, not just that they've approved and signed off on how you do risk, that they're actually sitting and understanding the operational procedure that flow from that, and to make sure that they're fit for purpose in their work. And provide similar risk management education for staff. So again, that everybody understands risk within an organization. Plan and budget for NIS2 compliance. Again, as I said, it depends on where you are on your cyber maturity journey, how much that's going to cost. The initial piece of it is to perform a gap analysis of your current compliance for NIS2 requirements. Estimate the effort, time, and budget required to become compliant. Again, where we are, what gaps really determine that. Create an effective implementation plan to address the compliance gaps. So, a structured plan to make sure that you've closed off all those gaps. Again, I would run back to my risk register to put all those gaps into the risk register to be addressed by risk, because it is a risk. The risk is that you're not going to be compliant with NIS2 by the 18th of October. They're a risk to the business. They should sit in your risk register, and they should be managed from there in a structured way rather than just ad hoc from a report that sits in a drawer at some stage. And then just taking into account that cost borne by you for NCA compliance audits, and I think I'll cover that a little bit more detail later. So the National Cybersecurity Compliance Audit approach, which is under, I suppose, discussion and negotiation, but the one decision that the government have made is that they're going to federate NIS2 compliance framework. So they're going to federate out to national competent authorities within each of the sectors to perform the audits and make sure the organization within that sector are compliant to NIS2. So it won't be simply that the National Cybersecurity Centre take on this role, because to be honest, it's a huge role, 2,000 to 4,000 organizations across multiple sectors. It's a better approach really to federate, because each of the sectors compliance are already have compliance requirements into these entities like the IAA or the National Transport Authority. So transport already have compliance under other regulations within there. So cyber is just another regulation that needs to be audited and become compliance against. So while it's not agreed yet, there are discussions being taken with organizations such as the IAA and National Transport, and not saying that they're already agreed, but the likelihood from my perspective is those types of organizations will be the national competent authorities in sectors. So if you have an already a management structure or a management organization or a regulatory organization within your sector, it's likely that they'll become your national competent authority, reporting back to National Cyber because it's a single point of contact. So overall, National Security Centre will be responsible at a national level, but the federated approach to the national competent authorities is how it's going to happen. There will be, as I said, there will be audits. So if you look at these organizations, the National Cybersecurity Centre are suggesting that they will use, I suppose in NIS 1, if those of you who are operators of essential service will have seen the self-assessment questionnaire, which is based on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 1.1. And that's been used for the last number of years to each September to submit a self-assessment questionnaire to the National Cyber, who can review that, decided on the level of risk, how are you moving forward, have you closed out on your any of your non-conformities or your compliance requirements. So that the intent, because that was successful, National Cyber is suggesting that we should use the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, which is updated a little bit better, adds the governance function within the framework. It's a good method of measuring. It's something that we use in ECHO to measure organization cyber maturity all the time anyway. So for us, it makes absolute sense. We probably would focus a little bit more on the specific top 10 mandated risk areas to say, let's show me really good and convincing evidence in those areas. But, looking at all the other areas makes sense because, while they're not specifically called out, some of them need to be in place to be secure. So that the likelihood is to continue to use that. The issue is that because of the federated approach, National Cyber are suggesting and will make available an audit, a self-assessment questionnaire audit based on CSF2, but there entities like the NTA, IA, or typical organizations like that don't have to use that approach. So it's up to them to decide how they do compliance. It's up to them how often they do audits. It's up to them how they would focus those audits, let's say. But typically those audits are going to be outsourced and be paid for by the organization being audited. So our approach to do a gap analysis audit for NIS2 compliance mirrors that suggested approach by National Cyber, using CSF2 as a foundation, which makes absolute sense. We probably slightly differ from the way that National Cyber would have done in the past. So instead of being compliant or non-compliant or partially compliant, we just measure that compliance on a level. And the levels we use are the CMM framework, which is a level of 1 to 5, and essentially you don't have the control in place, or you have at 5 you have the control in place and you're reviewed and continuously improved, and it's a really well-structured control. So it's useful to measure it in that way because you can see how well compliant, so how close to compliance you are, I suppose. But it's up to you to determine, because the NIS2 details that you must put in appropriate technical organizational controls, similar wording to GDPR. So you need to decide what's appropriate, and it's appropriate to the risk. So you need to determine your risk, again, back to risk management, understanding your risk profile. So in our sense, this provides a subjective level of compliance with supporting evidence. So it's not just that we'll pick a figure and say, you're a 3. We need to have some evidence of that. So documentary evidence, interviews with your staff, whatever that might take to prove you're at that level and that under that control. And then it provides a baseline of your cyber maturity for NIS2 compliance, but also for general cyber maturity. So it's good to have a baseline, good to have a measurement of how well you are in relation to cyber maturity. And that means that each year, even apart from NIS2 compliance, you can go and measure your compliance and see have you improved over time. So if you spend a lot of money during the year, it's nice to be able to measure and say, how has that improved and what areas have you improved in on your cyber maturity. And it also provides a roadmap for improved security over time. So we kind of, I suppose, go one step further in the sense that, okay, we measure how compliant you are now and, make a call on that in collaboration with yourselves. We also ask that, if you imagine you're at a level 2 under CNM, where would you like to go? What level do you feel is appropriate in terms of NIS2 to make sure that you're compliant? So maybe you don't need to be a 5, maybe a 4 is sufficient for you in your view, based on your risk. So we ask, what level you need to get to. I am currently measured at 2. I have evidence to support I'm a level 2 in this control. I would like to be a 4 because I feel that's where I need to be for compliance requirement. So how will we get there? So what are we missing? So you're looking, we'll have conversations with your staff and yourselves and review your documentation to see what's missing that will bring that control from a level 2 to a level 4 or a level 5 or whatever that is you want. So again, that provides your roadmap. Again, a very useful thing to have from a cyber maturity perspective. And then, as I said, this is a kind of breakdown of CSF2, continuous review and improvement, absolute brilliant way of measuring stuff. Really improved in the version 2 of it, which is only recently released. Added a governance piece, which wasn't there previously, which is absolutely core, and again aligns with what this top management responsibility and understanding that there's a governance piece in there in all maturity. It's divided into 22 categories and 106 subcategories. So there's 106 controls in there that you need to provide evidence that you're in compliance with, which again, really good way of measuring it. Even if your national competent authority decides to go a different route to measure your competence or to audit you under this too, it's useful to run through this gap analysis to show across all your controls how mature you are and to measure that with evidence. Then if you look at the top 10 cyber risk management measures called out for the first time, I suppose, in a piece of legislation, to I suppose highlight the fact that these are things that should be in place, in every organization, not just in NIS2 compliant organizations. So if you have a pretty mature cyber risk management measure, you need to have these things in place. So the top of that is risk analysis information security system policies. So have you got a policy procedure, you've a structured way of managing risk, you understand how, and everybody across your organization understands that way of measuring risk. So you can compare risks with each other. So you can decide which risk is of a higher level than the other across your different departments within your organization. Incident handling, absolutely. You need to have a good incident handling process, procedure, tested, tabletop exercise, crisis management exercises to hone that procedure and to make sure that your staff are fully aware of their responsibilities if an incident happens. What's the practical things you're going to do on that day? Because life continues when you're having an incident. It doesn't that, suddenly on a Friday morning when you're not too busy, maybe we'll have an incident on a Friday. They can appear at any time. So, it probably going to appear at the worst time in your business environment when you're really busy and there's lots of things going on, and the last day that you really need to have a problem. So having an efficient way to deal with that, absolutely key. Crisis management, business continuity. Again, if you have an incident and I'm in charge of the team to respond to that incident, I need to know what's important. So I can't know what's important if you don't tell me. So, business continuity, absolutely key. Tell me from a business perspective, what's important to you? What business functions do we need to keep delivering? How quickly we need to get them back up and online? Let's prioritize that so we come up with 10 or 15 business functions that we need to get online as quickly as possible in some sort of structured order. That dictates then your disaster recovery plan. So if you're saying, if you have a business continuity plan that says, let's say the HR system, HR manager needs to have that back online within 3 hours, or synchronized constantly, like a CRM system or something like that. A CRM system, you might need to have synchronous, a second system that just auto fails over to the second system to make it continuously available. HR system, you might have a couple of days or a day or 2 days or whatever it might be to rebuild that system. So there's less cost to that one than there is for a synchronized system that's available 24/7, 365. But equally, absolutely, in the middle of an incident, the last thing you want to be doing is having your incident response team come into senior management and say, okay, guys, what do I need to protect? Yeah, if it hasn't been hit, let's say by ransomware, what parts of our organization do I need to hive off to try to protect? And if it has been hit, which pieces do I need to build first? Having that business continuity plan and test it is really, really important, and flows across that. So you have a BCP plan, an aligned DR plan that will show that you can rebuild a system, and a tested DR plan that will show that you can rebuild a system within the time period required. And then that flows into incident response to help that incident response team to decide what's important on the day of an incident. Supply chain security, again, quite often incidents are in relating to your supply chain. So it might not be you, so you might be secure as hell and have all the good things and everything in place, but you assign a supplier who is pretty poor security practices, and suddenly they let you down. Maybe they don't tell you about it. So having that supply chain security is really, really important. And NIS2 has highlighted that, because when you look at operators of essential services under NIS1, an operator of essential service might have a business continuity plan, absolutely bells and whistles, everything's working. And one part of their plan might be, on the day, if we had a problem with a server, we'd go to Dell, and Dell will supply a server within an hour, and off we go, we're happy again. But what if you go to Dell and they don't have a server because their systems don't allow that to happen, or they're having a failure on that day? So you have a knock-on effect for the operator of essential services. And that's why the extension of all these organizations in the supply chain into NIS2 compliance was required, to make sure that the upper level organizations are protected from their supply chain. And again, from your own perspective, you'll see like lots of security questionnaires. Are you ISO 27001 accredited? Have you got all these security controls in place from multiple organizations? When you're responding to tenders, more often you're going to see requirements under security in there and data protection. So it's something that you really need to manage for yourself, to be a good supplier, and also to manage your own supply chain. Network security, absolutely, not just the security, but the acquisition. So how do you acquire network security? How you develop it, how you maintain it, including vulnerability handling and disclosure. So it's across all aspects of network security. Cyber testing and audit, make sure that you have good policy and procedures, testing and auditing to assess the effectiveness of cybersecurity risk management measures. When you register as an operator of essential service or important entity, you're going to supply the National Cyber or your National Competent Authority with a list of your IP addresses, your IP range on your internet perimeter. You may be subject to scanning by the National Competent Authority or by somebody to see that your perimeter remains secure. So you really need to get on top of your security of your internet perimeter. But equally, from a cyber testing and audit point of view, you really need to list everything that you need to test, have some sort of a governance structure around that, so that you understand, what's important to test, prioritize the testing. Obviously, you don't have unlimited budget or resources, but you need to focus that money and resources in the right places. So managing that is really important. Basic cyber hygiene, again, standard practices, security awareness, joiners, movers, leavers, policies around, what users can do, all the usual policies that might see in a pretty mature organization from a cyber point of view. Again, something that ISO, and I'll focus on ISO 27001, something that ISO will bring to the table, to make sure that that structure is there and that basic cyber hygiene is there as well. And again, measuring across the NIS or the CSF2, it's going to measure that for you. So it's one of the control files not specifically called out. Cryptography and encryption, procedures and policies for where you are going to use it and how you use it, the type of encryption you might use. Human resource security, access control policies, joiners, movers, leavers, asset management, background checks, all those good stuff that are typical of human resource security. Authentication using multi-factor where possible at all, or continuous authentication solutions, secure voice, text communications, and secured emergency communication systems with an entity where appropriate. So, again, if you're having an incident, you need to have some way securely communicate during the incident when maybe your primary systems are down. But also that you need to use multi-factor, like key, absolutely, with the amount of data breaches. In recent years, multi-factor is a no-brainer. It really needs to be on every system to prevent you from those passwords that were leaked being used against you. Sorry, that jumps into our final poll. So the second poll is, have you got a BCP and DR, a tested BCP and DR plan? So again, really critical that test happens and that you have results of that and you learn from that. Because, business continuity, the business is expecting the system to be back up within X amount of time. If you can't fulfill that and your DR plan doesn't allow you to fulfill that, you need to tweak your DR plan or set expectation from the business. Sorry, you're on mute, Kirsten.
I said my mouse went haywire, so that was the slight delay with that poll there. I don't know if you can see the responses coming in there. You're looking at the moment, so 36% no, 27% say yes in the last 6 months, 27% in the last 6 to 12 months, and 9% in 12 plus months. So the majority slightly is a no. They have not tested.
Yeah, and that's typical of what we see. It's a big effort to try test your BCP. I'm not trying to ditch the effort required to do that, but it can be that when you have an outage or something like that, a planned outage that you could use that as a test. So when you're moving across to a secondary system at some point, you could use that as a test to see how quickly you can rebuild that secondary system. So there are times where you could test it, but to document that fact and to see, and particularly document the issues you came across. So it might be something that looks pretty easy to do, and suddenly you discovered, there's simple steps missing in here that you need to address.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think that's the final percentages there. So play on.
Cool. Happy days. Yeah, as I said earlier, ISO 27001, the 2022 version, really good structure. It doesn't change that often. 2013 was the last time it was updated, but 2022 made it just easier to follow. It got rid of some controls, amalgamated some controls, put a better structure around it, I suppose, and it's absolutely a key benefit to NIS2 compliance. It provides structured management of information security. So again, tying in that senior management into the mix, effective use of information security budget. So risk-based approach for your information security budget. Embeds a culture of risk management. So it's not just enough to have that documentation, and you can implement ISO and just have a list of policies sitting in a SharePoint somewhere and not actually operationalize it. You need to really change that culture and to make sure that everybody across the organization understands the risk management culture. So when a manager is buying a new system, he considers not only that this system is going to make lots of money for the organization, but also there are risks associated, and to try to address those issues and minimize them on the way in. And prioritize risk based on criticality to the business, absolutely key thing from a business continuity point of view. Mitigates the impacts of risk effectively. Provides a competitive edge, due to your recognized standards. So again, having that badge of ISO these days, it's becoming more popular to see that in tenders and tender responses, and to do business with certain organizations won't allow you to do business without being ISO badged. So it's a key one from, I suppose, a commercial point of view as well. Increase trust, fulfill your compliance under NIS2, PCI, GDPR, and other compliance requirements around regulations. And to be honest, most organizations are probably doing about 67%, 60 or 70% of the work in relation to this in an ad hoc way. So you probably have a joiners, movers, leavers policy or process, maybe not documented, maybe not structured. You probably do change management, again, probably ad hoc, whatever meetings to do change management. It's just providing some structure around that so that you don't miss things. So it's not really that, you're adding anything more here. It's just try to put structure around what you're already doing. So I suppose then the key takeaways from this too are that, senior management accountability, absolute huge focus. You really need to have senior management bought into this NIS2 compliance requirements, understand risk, absolutely take full control of risks within their organization and completely accountability for those risks. Focus on digital resilience, it's, I suppose, a given almost from Europe that they expect you to have an incident, but now they want you to make sure that you can recover quickly from that incident. So, like we've tried to put as many controls as possible in every organization. And no matter how many controls you put in there, the likelihood is some hole or gap will appear at some point that will be exploited by some bad actors. So having that bounce back effect and testing that bounce back effect from a digital resilience point of view is absolutely key. Absolutely key from all the regulations that are coming in, DORA, CER, NIS2, a key team across all those. And then vendor management, again, something that you've seen yourselves in operation because you're being asked all those questions, and because that digital resilience needs to extend to your third parties. So it can't be that you're resilient and you've all the good things, you've tested everything, but your suppliers are pretty poor. So you need to manage those suppliers. You need to understand how they operate and make sure to operate in a manner that you're happy with. So then just echo as we help with NIS2 compliance. We have helped with NIS compliance for some of the operators of essential service, and we've worked for them the last number of years. So we're the largest provider. Echo is now the largest certified cybersecurity consulting team on Ireland. So we've got 1,000 people on staff and growing pretty quickly. So we have a lot of expertise and many years of expertise, because those companies that came together, the original cybersecurity companies, Ward Solutions, Context, and Cavio, to form that security arm of Echo. We're in the know. We've got knowledge and practical experience of all cyber frameworks. ISO, NIS, CSF, IEC 62443 is around OT security. Our consultants build influence and evangelize cultural change and risk management, and that's absolutely key. So, trying to change that culture in an organization, to understand your risk management in a culturally positive manner, I suppose, is really good. Strategic alignment. So we've high successful rec in assisting clients on NIS, the original NIS compliance, and now with NIS2. And we can manage all your governance risk compliance internally. So we got a huge team, a really diverse team. So whatever it is in cybersecurity realm, we can handle it for you. We're on to Q&A. I can stop talking, which is great.
Well, no, actually, only for about 20 seconds, so take a quick drink. We've got some really good questions coming in. If anybody does have any questions, we'll maybe give you 2 more minutes or so to pop them into the chat box or the Q&A. But the first question, Declan, where can I find NIS2 Impact Assessment Report?
A NIS2 Impact Assessment Report.
Stumped in the first question, have I?
Yeah, you did. So I suppose a gap analysis impact assessment, I suppose, is really what we need to focus on. So that's CSF2. It's a framework. It's an Excel spreadsheet, 22 controls, 106 subcategories of controls, and then how compliant you are under each of those, let's say.
Okay. Next question, are we supposed to report near-miss incidents under NIS2?
I would say I default on reporting, because you can't get in trouble for reporting. Absolutely, as in any organization, you'd be encouraging people to report incidents that they feel are incidents. They may not be incidents, but let's get more reporting rather than being hit by something that you hadn't been reported to you. So again, as the same structure for national cyber, report if at all in any doubt, and at least you can rescind that report afterwards if need be.
Fair enough. If I'm in a complex organization and I'm not sure if I come under NIS2, what do I do?
This is trouble. Yeah, so there are, obviously NIS2 has to be European-wide piece of legislation has to consider all sorts of organizations from small to large and all sorts of complex organizations. It's very difficult. The initial thing is to go to the legislation itself, look at the Annex 1 and 2, see if it looks like you're in there under any of those categories. It can be that you're under a number of categories because some organizations aren't straightforward. They do a piece of research, they do manufacturing, they do something else, and they might have compliance requirements under different areas. There are links to some legislation and like the NIS, and I won't even try to say what it is. It's a French word, but essentially it's a document which details all the type of business activities in Europe. So, you know, it kind of details legally what sort of an organization you are. So there are links there in the legislation that show where you could go to check to see if you're fall within that compliance requirement. But equally, sometimes it's a kind of a legal question in the sense that, you know, I do this type of manufacturing or research or whatever. Does that fall, you know, and you need to probably legally review the wording of the legislation against the description of the service you provide, if that makes sense. So sometimes it can be quite complex. And I suppose I tend to default on the fact that you need to be compliant. Because, you know, regardless of your compliance requirements, you need to be cyber secure. So, you know, these are basic controls. Yeah, you know, so you need to put these controls in place anyway. If you have compliance requirements, you have the controls in place. So we're all good, you know.
Yeah. Well, final question we'll round this up with. How can CISOs effectively communicate NIS2 compliance requirements to different stakeholders within their organizations? I like that because I suppose you know, with the onus being on C-suite and, you know, look, that being an issue, how can they effectively communicate that to all stakeholders within the business?
Well, I suppose like any organization, there's lots of compliance requirements. You know, there's lots of like the PCI, GDPR, NIS2 is another one. That not being compliant with that has a risk associated. So not being compliant with NIS2 means you can get a €10,000 fine, means you can get be publicized that you're not compliance, you can get in all sorts of trouble, maybe remove your certification. So there is a downside. And when you're managing, that's a risk. So that risk should be managed in the risk register, going back to the risk management process. So, you know, add that risk of being non-compliant with NIS2 for whatever reason, and that's the risk that needs to be addressed. So communicating that to top management, it sits in the risk register. They're supposed to take full ownership of that risk register. If it sits at the top of that risk register, it's something you really need to address. But, you know, equally, you know, it depends on the risk appetite of the organization. But essentially, no matter what you do, put it into a risk register and manage it there, because that's the structured way of doing things.
Okay. We actually have one more question that's just come in. I'm going to throw at you. Any idea when we'll know what the competent authority will be for each sector and what frameworks each will decide to employ? We were talking about this yesterday.
Probably the 17th of October at about 23:59 or something. I've no idea. You know, it's still under negotiation. Like like I suppose National Cyber are doing their best to try communicate it on it, but currently they're communicating to the original OESs and DSPs who would already have relationships with, like, and trying to tease out how this might work. Again, agreements like, you know, these are complex agreements, like, because, you know, the national competent authorities haven't really been identified yet. I'm just saying that the likes of NTA or the likes of IAR, typical kind of organization, it makes sense would take on that role. That's a lot of work for those organizations, something that they didn't do before. You know, so staffing, resourcing, how to do it, you know, is something new to them, and taking on that responsibility. But, you know, I suppose to err on the side of caution, and what we've done and what National Cyber are suggesting as the overall entity responsible is to use that CSF2 as a baseline. So having that gap analysis against CSF2 to see where you are across all the controls. I would look at the top 10 mandate controls and focus more on them on that assessment. So give me really good evidence. Let's have a really deep dive into those areas to make sure that all the areas have been covered. And then, you know, what more can you? I think you can just sit with that until 17th of October to see if something else comes out of it. But I'd say expectation is that will be addressed in the late summer. You know, National Cyber, even the assessment, CSF2 assessment type form, the self-assessment form, probably won't be ready until after the summer. I put one together ourselves because we've used a similar process internally in ECHO and for other services we provide. So that's our way we'll do gap analysis against NIS2, and I think it makes sense. I think it's a reasonable bet that they'll use the same assessment process, and I think most of the national competent authorities will take on what National Cyber are telling them as the assessment approach, because you know they don't have to do any work on it. It makes it easy. We're all aligned, and you know we'll be able to do that unless they're an authority to have a pretty robust auditing focus anyway.
Yeah. Okay. I know I said that was the last question, but can you do one more?
Go on.
Vendor management, third-party vendors, is that only ICT service providers or any third-party vendors?
I think the focus on NIS2 is on the vendors that will have an impact on the services you provide as that are critical, if that makes sense. So if I provide whatever it is, if I provide services to ESB, and I'm NIS2 compliance requirements under providing that services. So the systems that relate to me providing that service are the ones that are that you need to be managing, and the vendors that help you to provide that service are the ones that you need to manage in that. You know, so it's really around business continuity, because again, if you are providing very important, one of your business functions that are really important is the service you provide to some really important entity. So that should sit high on that business function that you have to recover quickly. And they might have expectations on how quickly you recover as a vendor to them, and then your vendors need to line up with that same expectation, you know, or
Okay.
you have a second vendor.
Okay, hope that answers that. Okay, that's the end of the questions. Thank you very much, Declan, for your time. Thank you all for your time, for sticking around. And if you have any questions, Declan's email actually I think is on the next slide, or you'll be all getting an email from us after this with the slide deck with the recording. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to shoot us an email.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if I can help at all, just give me a shout, and if I can answer it, I will. If I can't, I'll point you in the direction of trying to find the answer.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Take care. Take care. Thanks, everyone.